Shannon and I were talking, we share an office, we call it the penthouse. And we were talking, about what would be a good session for districts and for you all that would be a tool that you could use. How can we better help yourselves and your home communities? And we started talking about crisis communications. And so we did some outreach to say who could be the person to come in and speak. And a really good friend of mine, who's also a really good friend of Amy's, because we all worked together at one point, she said, "Have you talked to Amy Kay yet?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, Heidi, you're a genius. I need to get in touch with Amy." I had the pleasure and the honor of working with Amy in Governor Rendell's press office. And from my first day in that office up until now, Amy has been a friend, she's been a mentor. I've learned a ton from this woman. A lot of the communications that I've used and implemented came from lessons that she taught me. And a lot of those lessons dealt with how do you deal with crisis in a crisis situation. You never know what you're going to face. You never know what's going to happen. Amy has dealt with 3 Mile Island issues. She has worked for not one but 4 governors. She currently is working for a PA court system. In fact, she had to handle communications for the Sandusky case. So this woman knows a lot. And I think in this next hour, she's going to share her experiences with you. She's going to engage in some dialogue with you. And I think each one of you will take a little nugget back to your home district. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to sit down and turn it over to my really good friend, Amy Kelchner.
Thank you. Before we start, like I said, this is going to be informal. We're really going to do some back and forth here talking. So this isn't a speech. I will try to share some things with you that I know, but I'd like you to also share because you know your business better than anybody else. But if you have to leave, please, you're not going to in any way upset the apple cart. So this is a pretty casual session. I was going to say, would you all close your eyes and imagine this, but I know after lunch you really shouldn't close your eyes. So I'm going to just ask you to imagine this. It's a lovely late spring morning, and here's a little catcher. I originally was going to say it was a lovely summer morning, but I changed that. And if anybody by the end of this presentation can tell you why I changed from summer to late spring, you'll get a shout out. So I'm just going to, but we're in a lovely late spring morning. You're in your office, it's 10 o'clock and the phone rings. And it's a reporter from the local paper on the line. Come on in, we're very casual, and sit toward the front because I'm not using a microphone. So if you want to hear, there's some places back there. So you're sitting at your desk and the local reporter from the daily newspaper calls, and this is what he says. He says, "I've learned that one of your employees and a lab employee have been falsifying the results of water samples from a controversial farming operation that you recently implemented a nutrient management system for." And he learns that the corporation that owns this farm has been rewarding your employee and the lab employee for helping falsify those water samples. How was it discovered? Well, the local fishermen's club, Trout Unlimited, whatever, decided that the water just didn't seem right. But the lab results all said it was fine. So they took it upon themselves to hire an independent contractor to do some sampling. And they found out the water wasn't quite what it was supposed to be. Well, it seems that after they did that, it was a night after a nice green drake hatch. Everybody had had a good night on the stream, and all the local fishermen went to the local watering hole. And who was there but your employee? Had a few too many. Started boasting about the rewards that he was receiving. And not only that, he told the people there that his higher-ups knew about it and were involved. The reporter says, the story's going to run in tomorrow's paper, and it'll be on the website at midnight tonight. Do you have a comment? Oh, and by the way, the employee is the son of the chairman of the county commissioners. And he's engaged to your daughter. So what do you do? What do you do? And I'm asking that proactively. What's the first thing you do after you hang up that phone?
No comment. I ain't paying for the wedding.
No comment.
Call the person that they're talking about.
All right, first, check for the facts.
Yeah.
Perfect. Call the person. Would you do that first?
I would person that knows, sure.
Okay. So you check for the facts. You get him in there, and let's say he's a young guy, and him and he hauls around, but he tells you that indeed that is the case. What do you do next?
Talk to his boss who just implicated.
That's
Said
you.
that.
Yeah, that's you.
You.
You're the boss.
Oh, my God.
He works for you. He's one of your employees.
Suspend him immediately.
Suspend him immediately.
Check with legal.
I'm going to talk about that. Check with legal. What else? Okay, so now
Plan your
you,
response.
pardon me?
Plan your response.
Plan your response. So how do you do that?
Oh,
It's not that simple.
It's not,
It's
no.
not, because, I mean, I'm gonna give you an almost an exact experience like that in my district. And you check with legal, who gives you advice that says, don't do anything, don't say anything, no comment. So that's your first advice. Your county commissioners say, don't make any remarks, don't say anything, no comment. So now that's what you're doing. You've verified that the facts are correct to some extent, and now you've been told not to say anything. So now, good, what do you do?
Okay.
Payer.
All right.
The alleged payer.
Call who?
The alleged payer, the one who's paying for it.
Although I suspect that police officers, there's probably some legal, I mean, it's obviously illegal, so. Does anybody have any, but you're getting to the heart of everything we're gonna talk about, so that's good. That's what I wanted you to do. Anything else you would do? Anybody else you would call?
A few of the fisherman stores.
Your
Some,
driver.
Run. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Get a few of the other stories as to what happened while you were.
Okay, get all sides, is
All
what you're
sides.
saying.
You gotta talk to the county commissioners there.
You gotta talk to the county
I don't know how
commissioners.
much investigation I do, like I
Right.
said, once it turns into, I mean, you're talking almost criminal,
Right.
potentially criminal things here, and you're not the
Right.
investigator, you're not, I mean, you're the manager, you're not criminal investigator, so you can screw up an investigation by running ahead.
Now, I will tell you, I've dealt with a lot of crises over the years. And from prison riots to, we did the Sandusky stuff, which we weren't involved. That wasn't our crisis, but it was someone else's. I started out with 3 Mile Island. I was thinking back, I worked for DER when it was DER before it was DEP, back in the days of Cliff Jones. And I thought about all these, and I have dealt with a few employee crises, and that's what this is. So this is a little unusual, but I thought it would resonate because as I read through and I researched your districts, I found out you have some of those, so you could relate to it. But a lot of crises aren't employee, there are many others, but these are especially thorny. There's no doubt about that. And every crisis by its very nature is especially thorny. All right, so let's stop there and let me just tell you that when you have a problem, isn't the time to start to think about it. That isn't a good thing. So today we're going to talk about what you do in a difficult, not so positive situation where you're facing negative press or something that will cause the public to perceive you in a negative way. Now, let me start by clarifying the word crisis. If you are lucky enough to have a PR person, which by the way, you all have a resource in Brandy, but if you do, I talked to one gentleman from York, I think, and he said, well, we use the county's PR person. If you have a PR person and you're talking crisis, people in my business, crisis to us usually is something that there's a chance of a loss of life. So I wouldn't call this situation a crisis per se, but it's a bad deal. I mean, I wouldn't go and say, oh my God, we've got a crisis. I would say, we have a problem. So when you're talking to people in my profession, crisis probably is defined a little bit differently than you do. But certainly the situation that we just talked about is a crisis to you and one that you should think about. What I would like to do today is I would like to start just reviewing some general PR concepts about dealing with problem situations. And then I'd like to talk about 2 situations that I think you, in talking with your colleagues, that you likely face. One is public meetings. Does mostly everybody in here have to deal, at some point, have had to deal with public meetings, and they're thorny. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that, and then about a negative situation like this one that might pop up in the local newspaper. And then we'll open it up, and I'm going to go back and forth with you. I'm going to share some examples of those 2 with you, but I really would like this to be interactive, because you know what? I've sent a million of these myself. You're getting ready to go home, you just had lunch, and it gets boring. So the more we can talk like in a classroom situation, I think the better it will be for everybody, because I learn from you, I hope you learn a little bit from me, and you can learn from each other. Questions, I'm gonna just say, put them out there. Don't wait till the end. If something comes up, if you wait, you'll forget about it. Something else will come into your mind. So if you have a question, and I think it's gonna be answered, I'll tell you, but throw them out there right off the bat. Any questions about what we're gonna do today? Okay, let's start with some general concepts. Generally, dealing with a difficult situation, as I said, requires laying groundwork. And that means, number one, I think that one of the most important things is know your audience, or know the audiences that matter to you. That means your community. I think you probably all know your community, because talking with you, I think most of you live in your communities and probably have for some time. You must know the media. Now, how many of you actually know your local reporters? Excellent. You all should, really. I don't want to point fingers, but you should know the reporters who are in your community, because when something like this happens, believe me, they're going to be there along with so many more. Know your elected officials, which I'm pretty sure you know who your elected officials are. Know the opinion leaders in your community, because they can come to your aid in many, many ways. So know who in your community carries some clout and who people listen to. You know, I grew up in a real small town. I grew up in Mansfield. And, you know, there were just, and this was way back in the dinosaur age, of course, but there were certain people in town that everybody looked to. The doctor, Dr. Moore, Dr. Evans, the dentist, who had lived there for a long time. Elmer Peak, who was owned a local business, but he was kind of the point man for all the sportsmen, the fishermen, the hunters, all of those folks. So there were people in the community that were opinion leaders. I think it's very helpful if you know who those are. And also the stakeholder groups that you deal with. I'm sure you know who they are. If it's the water folks, the farmers, the fishermen, whoever it is, you should know who your stakeholders are. And then I would say you should have a plan in place. Now, PR professionals will come in to tell you, hire me and I will do a crisis communications plan for you and you'll be set. And I know Brandy, these younger PR folks are big proponents of that, but I'm going to have to say I'm not. I have never been in a crisis where we pulled out a plan. It don't happen. Now maybe you young guys do it, but we old guys never did that. What we did is we relied on our experience, and we knew certain things, and we didn't have to have it written down. But there were certain things that we had at our disposal ready to go. Number one, have you ever issued a news release? If you haven't, you should know how to do that and have a template. Of course you're not going to, you don't even have to fill it out. So-and-so said this today. When it comes, you're going to know what to put in that press release. But you need to have a template, and you need to know who to send it to, and my gosh, you need to know how to send it, which brings me up to mailing lists. You should have some email lists, is obviously what you want today. Not just media, but your stakeholders, your elected officials, whomever it is. Those should be in place. You can use those for a number of other things too, and I'm sure you have them, but make sure you have. Have a list of all those people, all your audiences. And then, importantly, identify who from your group is going to be your spokesman. And make sure that everybody in your organization knows who's going to be the spokesman. And make it very clear to them. Because you know what? I have found that everybody thinks that Andy Warhol was right, Mr. Pittsburgh. 15 minutes, that's all they want. They want their 15 minutes of fame. And when there's a problem, everybody becomes an expert. And they're all going to talk. And so your employees should know that when there's a crisis, you or whomever the person is, who is the person who's going to speak. Then, as you go through, keep your audiences informed. Your board, your county commissioners, your employees need to know what's going on. Do not keep them in the dark, because they can be your greatest ally, but you know what? They know more than anybody else, and they can be your greatest enemy. Believe me, I know you don't fall into this category, but I surely do. There's some people in my office who work for me that really don't like me. It's hard to believe, I know. But when a situation like this comes up, how better? How better than to call the local reporter and just give a little bit of information? You know, the boss, well, they had a relationship like this. I mean, she let him get away with everything. So, you know, maybe she did know about this. Going back to our earlier example. make sure, and this is where I can't in an hour impress this upon you, but I hope that you all embrace this. Be committed to transparency, and we're talking about that. But when you're in a crisis, you know what? You gotta trust your gut, and you gotta do the right thing. And there's gonna be people out there telling you to do not the right thing. And maybe not something that's illegal or a lie, but they're gonna tell you to do something different than you in your gut think is the right thing. And you know what? I can see in this room we have many seasoned people. Trust your gut. I suspect that's how you got to where you're at. And make sure that people in your organization know that you're very committed to transparency. You're not gonna, that's not how you do business. Because you know what? In this day and age, it'll just sink you. Yes?
You run a clothing bagger operation and all of a sudden commit to transparency.
Well,
You've got to be committed to transparency.
in everything, in everything. Absolutely right.
So you were talking earlier about legitimizing stakeholders' opinion leaders. Is there anything that you should do with people who are your enemy, that are the people who've just been waiting for something like this to happen so that they can?
Well, sure. I mean, I go after every group. And I'm gonna talk about a little bit about this when we talk about a public meeting. Because you always have an advocate, nobody comes to a public meeting all agreeing with you, or why the heck would you have to have the meeting? There would be no reason. So I am a great believer in always keeping everybody informed and reaching out to all the stakeholders. I didn't say your favorite stakeholder groups. I said all your stakeholders. And your stakeholders are those who are against you, and they're those who are for you. You've got to treat them all the same. All the same.
But not everybody has that philosophy.
No, and that's why you got me as a speaker today, because this is my philosophy. So, over my years, this is what I have found in my many, many different situations has worked. Again, at the end of the day, and this is a little off the topic, at the end of the day, who do you got to be true to, folks?
Yourself.
Yourself and your maker, if that's what you're about. That's it. And I will tell you, in the 30 plus years that I have done PR, and I've done it all, prisons, Department of Health, DER, you name it. I've done the whole bit. If I have never lied, and I've done things that I didn't think were the smartest things, but I've never done anything that was illegal. Right in my current job, I have a guy who's a lawyer, drives me bonkers, because he comes up with these PR solutions that I think he's so wrong, it makes my head want to explode. But I gotta tell you something, every one that he's proposed has been right. It's worked. I don't know if it's been right, but it's worked well, and it's driving me crazy. But at the end of the day, I go home, and I think I've always been true to who I am. And when I retire in the next couple of years, which I am going to, I will go out knowing. And that's what I think is so important, just to you as a person. And that's, I think, translates into public relations. Because the public perceives you only as authentic as you can, as you are. You think right now the legislature is a group of authentic individuals? Of course you don't. You perceive them negatively right now. At least I'm just going by the polls. I don't. I hold them in the highest esteem. But that's what their perception is. And I think, if you stick to your guns, in one situation, I always say this to my boss, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court recently. I was trying to talk him into doing something, and he looked at me and he said, no. I said, okay, I'm going to try one more time. I tried, he said, no. And I said, at the end of the day, I'm a paid communications person. I make my best recommendation, and then whatever he tells me I do. If it's illegal, or, I never would he ask me to do anything like that. But if I work with a group long enough, they know who I am, they'll usually go along with it because they think, gee, this is the way she operates. And I suspect the same thing with you. People know what your modus operandi is and they know how to deal with you. Take advantage of your resources. You have Brandy, you have your local government folks. Again, determine your audience, determine your key messages, what we talked about a little bit early, and deliver your messages through multiple channels. And this gets into communication speak, and I don't want to go too much there, and I think the next person's going to talk about social media, but there are a lot of ways to get your message out. Press release, talking to groups, having people come in for meetings, tweeting if you do, although government, related, it's very, yeah, it's a really fine line, and your next speaker will talk to you about that. But there's many ways to get your message out. Just don't put a news release and say, we're done. That ain't how it works. Your newsletter, your website, whatever, there's many ways to tell your message. So those are just some of the general concepts that work in any law, but are especially important when you have a crisis. So let's look at a public meeting. Let me give you a few hints about a public meeting. From my perspective, I'm sure you have many of your own. When you have a volatile situation, the first meeting, I will tell you, is going to be a venting meeting. It's going to be venting. People are going to get up at that microphone and they're just going to complain, complain, complain. That's all it's going to be. And you know what? That's okay. Because in the psychology of meetings, that's what happens. And you know what? The second public meeting, they're going to vent. And that's okay. Now, by the third, my experience is you're going to start to have people want to hear what you have to say and actually start to listen. And by the fourth, they're going to actually start to work with you. They aren't going to like you. They aren't going to agree with you. But by the fourth meeting, you will start to give a certain give and take. Listen to what they have to say. Be respectful, and don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. They don't agree with you, and that's what America's based on. We have people with all different kinds of opinions, and we embrace all of them. So never in your job are you going to get everybody to agree with you. It ain't going to happen. So listen, respect, and don't take it personally. When I do public meetings, I always set a time limit, because if you have a real contentious one, in 2 hours, everybody's exhausted. Everybody. And when I start, it's the first thing I say. I say, we're going to welcome your comments. We're going to go for 2 hours tonight, because, and I'm honest, after 2 hours, everybody's whooped. And then we'll do what we can in 2 hours, and then we'll pick it up the next time. But make sure everybody knows the expectation.
May I suggest you post the ground rules, you say, and people don't listen.
You can do that too. You surely can do that. That's a good idea. I have
Recorded
a problem.
meeting,
Surely.
recorded.
Absolutely. Well, because you know what? If you don't, they're going to record you. You know, everybody's got a phone.
Oh, yeah.
Everything you say at that meeting, everything. You pick your nose, you fall asleep, you yawn, you roll your eyes. All of that's on somebody's cell phone. You know that, right? And it's going to be posted before they get out the door, because they're going to post it right from their phone. They're going to upload it to YouTube. Oh, I worked with a guy in Governor Rendell's office, Lance. And he went to California, he worked for a transit department, and he fell asleep during the meeting. And he was a highly paid official. Well, that went viral. Viral. Across, and what do? Once it's out there, you think you take it down? So everything you do at a meeting, know that it's going to be out there for everybody to see. Don't argue with people at a public meeting, but correct the record. If they say something that's wrong, you should not feel apologetic about correcting the record as best you can. Don't let one person monopolize, because you have those guys. And what I would always do is I would say, you know what, you've brought up so many good points, and because there's so many people who want to speak, if you go to the back of the room, one of our staff will come back, or when I'm done tonight, I'll come back and talk to you one-on-one, and then we can get a wide variety. So don't let one person monopolize, because there's always a person who tries to do that. Make sure your room is larger than your audience. Because if we had 200 people in here right now, I can guarantee you, you'd be feeling pretty uncomfortable. It's hot, it's loud, people are standing, they get agitated. No. Make sure you always have a space much, much larger than the number of people that are going to be there. Consider security, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. I always would follow up with the interested parties, and this is where we get back to the people who are for you and against you. I always follow up outside of the big meeting, because let's face it, more is going to get accomplished in a smaller meeting than a public meeting, but you still have to have the large public meetings. But consider going to those folks and talking with them one-on-one, and go to them. Don't say, oh, if you come to my office. No, you go to their office, and you sit down with them and talk to them, and that really works best. Also, consider a press briefing, because the press is going to have their cameras, and they're all going to be rolling. That guy's going to be standing there, and he's going to be shaking his finger at you, and that's all going to be shown. But the only way you can tell your message without that chaos is to have a press briefing for the press one-on-one. Now, if somebody wants to come in, you can't keep them out. Don't ever try to keep people out, because it doesn't work. Don't say, I'm sorry, this is just for the press. No. It's a public meeting, let them come in. Yes.
Press briefing after the big meeting.
Either after or better before, when you're still got a little juice, because afterwards you're going to be bored. If you can't, whatever works best. I'm sure there's strategy both ways. I think just because you're fresher, and that way they have it in their head, and the press leave early. You know, they come and they'll film for 5 minutes when the most crazy loon from your town is up there screaming at you, and then they leave, and by then, at the end, everybody's singing Kumbaya, and that never makes the newspaper or the TV.
The reason I was thinking afterwards, because other issues may come up that weren't on the table before, or during the meeting.
Right, but
Which case then you can address afterwards.
Right, and you can always call them too. You know, you shouldn't feel like you can't call the press. Everybody is scared of the press, they don't like the press. Listen, I've worked with these guys a long time. You know what they are about? They're about doing a job that they love, just like I suspect you are. They're about providing for their families, just like you are. They're about doing a good job because they take pride in their craft, just like you do. And they really aren't out to screw you. I mean, they're just not. And I hear that in my office all the time. Oh, that reporter from the Tribune Review, he's got it out for us. That guy from the Morning Call, he's got it out for us. Well, you know, maybe, but not so much. I really found reporters to be fair. If you treat them like human beings, just like you like to be treated, they'll pretty much go with you. What else? Keep everybody informed. Like if you have a meeting and some of your county commissioners or whoever wasn't there, try to follow up with them afterwards. Be very clear with your audience about what your next step is. We're going to have another meeting, or the decision's going to be made by the end of the week, or whatever. Make sure they leave there knowing what's going to happen next. If you don't, they're going to all flood you and call your office and whatever. And be prepared for anything. Be prepared for anything. I did a meeting after all the 3 Mile Island meetings and all the venting out of the towers. Remember, they had to get rid of some of the radiation, and I went through all of those. I was right out of college, my first job, the Governor's Commission on 3 Mile Island. I was their PR person. Let me tell you, I didn't know diddly squat about PR, but I learned. After all of that, we were dealing with Cannonsburg. Is anybody here from that part of the state? There's a uranium mill tailings. There was a plant in Cannonsburg that did make uranium. And over the years, from the 20s on, they had just thrown it in a pit. So in Cannonsburg, in the middle of the community, is a big pit of radioactive uranium. So in the 70s, the EPA decides they're going to take care of it. So we're going to have a public meeting, we're going to talk about that now. That's a real happy subject, as you can imagine. But I was dealing with a bunch of contractors from Department of Energy and EPA, and these guys were, I mean, this is what they did for a living, and this is where I started to learn real how to deal with these situations. Had this meeting in a school auditorium. They were planned. We had it all planned. It was just, and it wasn't a pleasant meeting. Let me tell you, it wasn't pleasant. But I said, you know, I think we should get some security. So got undercover police officers, state troopers to come, and they came early. You know, this is the law. This is what we're going to do. And through the meeting, they kind of moved around, which you never noticed because there were so many hundreds of people there. And we had a microphone just like that. And I was sitting where you, gentlemen in the green shirt, I sat right where you were sitting. That's where I sat, so I could take notes. And all of a sudden, one cop sat where gentleman in the blue shirt, you are, and the other cop sat where gentleman in the plaid shirt is. So they surrounded me. And this guy decides, now he moves in next to me and he said, don't look up, but there's a man 3 people back, they were waiting in line to talk, with a leather coat, and he's got a concealed weapon. And I said, okay, and he said, I'm gonna ask you to move. I'm gonna move into your seat, and we're just gonna handle this the best we can. But they didn't wanna move him out because they didn't know what was gonna happen. So the guy comes to the microphone, and he has the leather jacket. He's a very nice looking man, very put together. You know, he didn't look like a derelict or anything. And he stood and he went like this. And he pulled his coat together, but of course, they thought he was going for his gun. And these police officers were so poised. And I thought I was going to die. Obvious. I mean, literally, I thought I was going to die. And my boss is sitting up there, and I thought, oh my God, they know nothing. The people at the panel table knew nothing. But the guy did. He just buttoned his coat, and he left it down, and he spoke. And I don't think I have ever had since a more graphic reminder of why it's important to be prepared. Because that could have been a very nasty situation. After he was done, he walked the back of the room. The cops got up. They went back. He had a permit to carry a concealed weapon. So they just talked to him. They said, hey, if you come back the next time, leave it in your truck, the whole bit. But be prepared, because anything can happen. Now, does anybody have anything they want to say about a public meeting, or do you want to hold till the end? Well, let me talk to you a little bit about, yes.
Could you address a policy in place for, and inform the
potential speakers that they have 3 minutes or 5 minutes to do their basic.
These
case.
guys, you mean to inform
Yeah.
people at the, yeah, well, that's what I would do. I would start and I'd lay the ground rules. I'd stand up and I'd say, this is what we're here to do tonight, we're here to listen to you, or whatever your agenda is. I'd say, we're gonna give a short presentation. Let me tell you something. If you try that, they aren't gonna listen. Not the first meeting. They don't care what you have to say. They want you to hear what they have to say. So I would keep the presentations to a bare minimum. And I would say, we've posted our presentation on our website. I hope you've taken the time to look at it. Tonight, we're here to take your questions or to take your comments. And because we have so many people, first of all, we're gonna limit it to 2 hours. And then we're gonna limit everybody to 2 to 3 minutes. Because we wanna be respectful of you wanna be respectful of your neighbors and give everybody a chance. At the end, if we have somebody who wants to come back, we'll take it. And then if we still have time and we're done, we'll talk to you in the back of the room, one-on-one. I would just set now what happens in a group dynamic is, even if everybody's really angry at you, people for the most part, especially in smaller communities, and I know that sounds horrible, but I find this to be the case, people are respectful of their fellow man. And they're not gonna be like those fans in Cleveland where they beat up. They're not. They're gonna gang up on that idiot. Who's the idiot? You know, the person who stands up and is just needling, and pretty soon the crowd will kind of say, sit down, shut up. I find that's what happens a lot of times. They will, but the first meeting, when you go out there, you just have to kind of be prepared to deal with anything. But if you put it out for them and tell them, that's the best you can do. And I would always, if that person goes on, I would say, you're over your time limit. I'd say, I could butt in. And then after a minute, I would say, we're gonna have to move on to the next person. And then I'd say, ma'am, you in the purple, why don't you come up, and it's the best you can do.
Right, and even the possibility of asking if anybody's got any problem with being cut off at that point, and just so that there's freedom to cut them off, because you're gonna have to cut somebody off. So I wanna check in with you to find out if that's okay now, because I'm gonna cut you off. Is that okay?
Okay, so that's what I've kind of learned at many of the public meetings. Let's talk about negative stories in the media. You guys went over a lot of these, so you really hit these off. Make sure you know the whole story before you respond. I would always say this, come clean when you can, because it's gonna happen eventually. So I wouldn't hide things. I would really decide how you're gonna put it out there, but I would come clean if you have a problem. Also, if you do have a PR person working with you, this is one thing that drives us crazy, is we get in a room with people and they tell us so much, but they never tell us the whole story. But then it comes back and then they tell us a little bit more. Those poor PR people at Penn State, they should sue. They should sue, because none of that from a PR perspective had to go down the way it did at the beginning. They called their PR people in a day or 2 days before Sandusky. They knew that was coming. He was going to be charged. They never told their PR people. Now, come on. A big university like that? So if you have access to PR people, tell them the whole thing. It's just like when you go to a lawyer for a divorce. They always say to you, tell me the whole story, because I'm going to find out eventually anyway. So put it all out there so they can make their best recommendation of what you should do to move forward. Don't let your lawyers dictate. I'll go back to that. I know it's hard, but I'm really people to stay true to that. I would always avoid saying no comment, because if you hear somebody, and that's what you said, no comment. If you say no comment, if somebody says that, like if they ask a senator today, blah, blah, did you do this, and the senator says no comment, what do you think as a person? He did. He's guilty. Of course that's what you think. So you know what? You can say no comment in a very creative way. What I would say is, we cannot comment at this time. We're reviewing it. We're going to look into it, and as soon as I have an answer, I will call you back. But right now, I just can't, I just don't have enough information to be able to give you. You can do something like that. It looks much better than no comment. Or the PR person could not be reached for comment. That's baloney today. If you have a PR person and they can't be reached for comment, go. That's right, they got it. If you can't be reached for comment, in this age of cell phones and whatever, somebody can be reached. So I always like to say something like that. Don't count on something going away, because it's probably not in today's world. Don't overreact, on the other hand. Try to sit down and take a deep breath and figure out the severity of the situation. Another thing that people do when dealing with a bad situation, they'll say, well, I read all the President's Men when I was in college, like I did, And I'm just gonna talk to these reporters off the record. Don't do that. Unless you're really experienced in dealing with the media, you don't know what off the record means. It means something different to every reporter you deal with, and some reporters may just dish it. You know, they just say, I don't care, I've got the story. Because what they're gonna do if you tell them something off the record is they're gonna go to the next guy and say, you know, I was told this by a very top-ranking official, blah, 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 blah. Can you confirm that? And then the person's gonna say, well, yeah, I can, yeah, uh-huh. Well, obviously that top-ranking official was you, so yeah, I can confirm it. They have ways, I mean, they're reporters and they're good at it. And there's a way they do their job. And so I just recommend you do not talk off the record. Use your advocates to speak on your behalf when you can, and know that your own staff, as I said earlier, might decide they are gonna talk to the media, so watch that. And a very important thing in all of this is monitor the public reaction. You know, if you have somebody young on your staff, like I always did, that would monitor Facebook and Twitter, all the stuff I hate, to be honest with you. I hate it. But I understand how critical it is. But be monitoring what people are saying in the community. I mean, what did they say at, you know, in the Wellsboro Diner? Every day there is a group of community leaders that have breakfast. There's about 10 or 12 of them. Believe me, what they're saying matters. So, you know, what are those guys saying? What are people saying on Facebook? What are the teachers up at the school saying? What are the fishermen saying? What are the farmers saying? Try to keep an ear open to what's being said in the community so you can respond. Now, let me tell you about a negative situation that I dealt with when I was in the governor's office. I got a call one morning from the governor's chief of staff. This was after 9/11. And remember the anthrax in the envelopes that was being sent to the media? Never understand why they wanted to poison the media, but we got a call, and the governor's chief of staff said to me, we have a guy at Mansfield, which is where I went to school, university, who is in critical condition in the Wellsboro Hospital. He has been infected with anthrax. And he said, what do we do? Well, luckily I worked at the Department of Health through 9/11, and I understood there were two kinds of anthrax. And one is just environmentally occurring. And what had happened, this guy was a drummer, and he went to Africa to get skins to make drums. And the anthrax got off the pores in the animal skins onto his body, and he became sick. Now, he was not contagious. But if your kid's going to Mansfield and you find out somebody was there and that your kid was at the concert with the guy that had anthrax, yeah, probably a little bit concerned. So what we did was we briefed, I got the Department of Health on the phone, we briefed the decision makers at the governor's office of what was going on. We called the president of the university with this PR guide. We told him what we knew. We said, this is what we would like you to do. They had a meeting with their trustees, you know, and this can all be translated to your own group, your county commissioners, whoever. They had a meeting, they decided what they were going to say, they prepared a communication for their students, parents, their staff, and the community. They issued a press release, and they held a public meeting, and we sent somebody from the Department of Health, who was a Mansfield graduate, by the way, which was a very smart little move. And he went up and they invited students, anybody who wanted to come, to ask questions. We did that all within 24 hours. So they very proactively educated people. They kept the press informed of what was going on. They reached out to their community leaders. As a result, there was no panic, and there was no negative lingering effect on the school. You know, it wasn't people saying, oh, my kid's not going there, that's the anthrax school. Never happened. Could have it? Sure. Sure it could have. But it didn't, because they were very proactive, and that's how we did it. And I will tell you, that story got international coverage, so it was out there. But it was handled, the school picked it up, and they handled it very well. So those are some of the things that you can do, too. I think that's what I wanted to chat with you about. But what do you have? I mean, do you have questions or a pointer for your fellow folks?
One of the things, you talked about a lot of stuff going out from the organization, but I think what Mike said is important too, that as soon as you know that there's reason to believe you have a problem, and we have a district that just went through this. And, manager went to the board with the problem, board went to the county commissioners went to the DA and state police. But some of the things that they told them to do, for instance, is first and foremost, lock down all the evidence. And so in your office, if you are the holder of those records of water quality or anything else, when you go to the proper officials, they will tell you the course of action internally of what to do so that you don't end up with a second problem of, oh, and now all the records are gone. So you gotta work externally, but there are people who can help you, and I have the same opinion of lawyers, but, you know, there are people who can work internally to help you not create secondary problems.
That's right.
So you gotta work internal as well as external, so. And eventually, they had a public official who wasn't a county commissioner who issued information to the press which was incorrect. They came back and put out a very good press release saying, this is incorrect. And it said, you know, this was asked for this day, we gave it to them within 24 hours. This was asked for, this was asked for. And they did a very good job of setting the record straight so that the stuff that was put out by another county official didn't kind of just snowball.
I'm gonna give you the real scenario, because I don't think we necessarily handled it the way it should have been handled, and I'd like some intent.
Are you this person?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, different scenario, a narrow one. We had,
This is a different
last year we had, and you may have Googled it, because it was everywhere. We had an
Are you the
employee-
animal person?
Yes. Yes. We had an employee whose mother went out to his house for some reason or another and heard some whimpering and opened his chicken coop and discovered that he had taken his dog, duct taped the dog's 4 legs together, duct taped the dog's muzzle shut,
Can you all hear this?
And
Because
kept
this is
him-
interesting. Yeah, turn sideways.
kept him in the chicken coop. A dog, an employee, an E&S tech, young 25, had done this, duct taped his dog, put him in the chicken coop, left him there for the day. The mother, as all mothers would, took pictures of it on her cell phone and sent it to the TV station and the radio station and the newspapers. Did not call their son, did not do anything, just sent it directly to the papers. So now, it's on all the TV stations, it's in all the newspapers. The police come out, the Humane Society comes out, they take the dog, they release the dog, they arrest the kid, charge him with animal abuse. Okay, animal cruelty, a couple of other misdemeanor charges. There might have been a felony in there. And now he's an employee of the district, which is in bold letters everywhere. This is a Pike County employee who has done this horrendous thing. And it went on for days. Within a few days, there were, it went viral, it was on the internet, the pictures were everywhere. A petition was started that 7,000 people eventually signed saying, fire this guy. We did, in fact, we called an immediate executive board meeting. We all spoke to each other. We decided it was a horrendous situation. We had to talk to the county commissioners. We involved them. They went legal. Our legal guy said, you cannot say anything. This is not a proven situation. You can't do anything. He hasn't been found guilty of a crime. He can't be suspended. Leave it alone. Don't say anything. And so our chairman of the board and our district manager basically said nothing. We kept away from it. One of the things we did not do was inform our employees of the processes we were going through. So they are saying, what the hell is wrong with these people? They're not paying any attention to what's going on. They don't seem to care that all of these things are happening. Now, threatening letters started coming into the district, threatening emails. We had to have police come by. We had to put locks on our doors. People were literally afraid that they were going to be shot, employees in the office. And this kid continued to work for us. Now we had people who said, don't send him to my property because he can't do my work. I don't want him on my property. I have the right as an employee, as a landowner to say, stay out of my property. It went on for months. And all of us continued to get these emails and these letters and all this threatening stuff. People sent bloody cases to the office, said, how about it if this was you? Eventually, the Friday before Christmas week, he went into court, pled to a misdemeanor, spent the weekend in jail, was fined a certain amount of money, and came into the office the following Monday morning and told my district manager what had happened. And we had, again, an executive council meeting with the commissioner by phone, decided it was 2 days before Christmas. We were clearly going to fire him based on the fact he had now been found guilty of a crime, but we weren't going to do it 2 days before Christmas. And so we fired him the following Monday. It went on and on and on. More people kept signing the petition. More people kept sending us threatening letters. Even though he'd been fired, even though it was done, they never got it. So then it turns out at a board meeting, we have all our employees in a fit, very angry at us because A, we didn't tell them what was going on. B, we didn't tell them why we were taking the actions we were taking. And C, we didn't do anything as far as they were concerned. So my question to you is, What would you have done differently?
Well, I'll tell you, well, first of all, you didn't have a PR person at the table.
Well, no, let me just say, Brandy called. Brandy and Robert both called and said, we've heard you've got this big problem. We're hearing about it here in Harrisburg. Can we help?
This is what I would have done. I would have strongly recommended that, first of all, I would have said something. And I would have said, we're saying something, and this is what I would recommend. Secondly, I would have put the employee on leave with pay. I would have just said, until we know and until this process plays out, we're going to put this gentleman on leave with pay. He can't go back at you because he's getting paid. That's what we do with judges who go afoul of the law all the time, which is the right thing to do because it gives them their due process. So then I would have removed that. Then I would have called the press, and I would have had a very active, but how many times have I said, your internal people are the most important because they're your best advocates, so I would have done that, which you now know, and I would have talked to the press. And, you can call the
What did you
press.
say?
Well, I would have called them and I would have said, listen, we have an unfortunate situation here. Allegations, we don't know if they're true. And in our cult, in America, we have due process. But we understand that there's strong feelings on every side of this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to place this employee on leave until it has a chance to play out. And then we will take the appropriate steps. Do we condone this type of behavior? For those who would even suggest it, of course we do not. I mean, God, we're conservation people. Who loves animals anymore? But I would have really talked to them. But probably if you had started, you would have still gotten a little pushback. But you would have. Let me tell you, and because we're almost done, but let me tell you a funny story that relates to that. And I'll just say the name Michael Vick and dogs. Do you remember that story? My brother is a football coach at Christopher Newport University. It's a small school in Virginia. And he runs a football camp. And one of his kids that he recruited when he coached at William & Mary was a guy named Mike Tomlin. And they have remained very, very good friends over the years. And Mike helps him with his football camp. As a matter of fact, he will be there today at his football camp. And so he does it in association with Nike. And the Nike guy called and said to Matt, do you mind if we bring Mike to the camp to talk to the campers? And Matt thought, I don't know why they're asking that because Mike's been here for 2 days already, but sure, I'm okay. Well, you know where this is going now. Now, what you got to know is Michael Vick is from Newport News. That's where he grew up. And when he was under house arrest, that's where he was. So Matt says, sure. And so all of a sudden, in comes this bus with all these kids from the Boys and Girls Center. And who's in with them but Michael Vick? So my brother calls me. Now, he was a communications major at Susquehanna, but he was not prepared for this. And he calls me and goes, what the hell do I do? But I never spoke to him, but he did the right thing. This is what he did. He isolated the situation. He got Michael Vick and Mike Tomlin into the green room at the auditorium where the kids were all going to go. He decided that instead of letting the kids leave the field and go to the locker room where they would get their what? What's the first thing they're going to get out of their lockers? Kids today. What's the first thing they're going to reach for? Their phones. They can go to the locker room. So all these sweaty little kids are paraded into the auditorium. So there were no cell phones. While they waited for practice, the camp to be over, it was about 2 hours. He, Mike Tomlin, and Mike Vick sat in the green room for 2 hours. He says, I'm going to have PETA, whose national headquarters, by the way, are 1.5 miles from the front gates of Christopher Newport. He called the president. He said, this is what's happened. When he said Mike, I thought he meant Tomlin. He meant Vic. He's here. I got him in the green room. The president signed off on everything. They got Vic out. He spoke for 10 minutes. Matt said he actually did a good job. Now, let me tell you, too, his parole was up the next day. The next day. So the next day, but Matt said, like, oh my God, there's our, university, Christopher Newport, and he goes, PETA right down the road. They're going to be up here. But he spoke. They got him off the stage, and he took questions. And the one kid said, I guess he was about 7 years old, he raised his hand. He goes, who are you? That was the question, who are you? Now, this is Virginia. They've never asked that in Pennsylvania. But, same thing. And there are issues that really do resonate with people. And animals are one. But so are environmental issues. Because, I learned it, Chima, not in my backyard. That's what you're dealing with. And you're trying to do the best, yes.
I was going to follow up with that question. How about the internal communications? Like, you didn't talk to the staff. I guess.
It was a bad error. It was a bad error.
Yeah.
Because the staff had had inappropriate, they thought we didn't care. They didn't understand what we were doing in closed-door meetings. They didn't understand what we were doing in all of those executive sessions. They thought we didn't care.
Was that just, was that based on the lawyer's advice too, to not communicate with them, or how?
No, it wasn't based on the lawyer's advice. I believe that the chairman of the board and the executive director both felt that would be the better way to handle it. Again, not to spread the rumors, not to spread the story, not to keep feeding the story.
Yeah, it would make more sense to me to counteract the rumors. and to
Exactly,
be-
because you know what, just think of your own self.
Right.
The more you know, the more comfortable you feel. And your people are community members, so they're going out and, you know, Harriet went that night to, you know, the United Methodist Women. And they're all like, Harriet, what's going on at your office? Now Harriet's going, well, I don't know. And, you know, she could have been your best advocate. She could have said, listen, you know, and she could have given your message. And when you do messages with crisis, you want to keep them real simple, but you got to get to the heart of it. And I always try to get three messages. Beyond that, you're going to lose people. But I have 3 messages. It's the American system. We've got to give him his due process. We're putting him on leave without pay. And golly, we are as sick about this as employees because this affects us as anybody else. But we have to give the guy his due process, and we'll see how it plays out. Maybe it isn't true. Who knows? But we'll let it play out.
We had photos.
Yeah, right.
Sent by his
Right,
mother to
right,
the television.
Right. Well, just like Sandusky, I mean, that, so many things that remind me of that, but yeah. So
Exactly.
always internal,
Exactly.
always keep your people informed. And if the lawyers say no, does anybody else have any other questions or comments?
I like
Yes.
one saying that someone told me years ago I really liked. There is no right way to do the wrong thing.
That's a very good saying. And you know what? Everybody in their gut knows what's right. Everybody seated in this room knows what's the right thing to do. And to thine own self be true. Because when I hang it up in a year and a half, I'm going to go out with my head held high knowing I never sold out. I never lied to the public. I always advocated for what I thought was the right thing to do. And most always I was able to convince. Not always. But there isn't one right way. Like I told you about that lawyer that's confounding me, that Philadelphia guy. He knows he's cocky. He's real, I mean, he comes up with these, I just can't believe it. Anybody else have another question or comment? So now, we're gonna go back to that first story. Remember, you go in, the paper calls, nice summer morning, late spring morning.
Fishing season.
Okay, you're getting close. What?
Spread manure.
That wasn't the thing.
You should high water tank.
Nope, that wasn't it either.
The hatch coming on.
What kind of hatch?
You said Drake.
Green drape, which is
Oh,
late spring.
late spring.
Very good, you're the winner, you get the shout out, that's exactly right, good for you. Because I was gonna say summer, and I thought, oh no, the green drapes, that's the end of May. Because my husband, who's retired, that lawyer, his new job is, we have a cabin on Pence Creek. And he's a fisherman, that's all he does, he's there today. So, hey, you were very, very good, and use your resources. I'm glad, you know, that they proactively called you, it's very
And they
helpful.
did, it was really nice. but
Yeah,
we
because
chose not to
there
do
are
it.
some resources, you don't have to have a PR person, but there are a lot of good people who just have been through a lot. We don't know it all, and there is not one right way. There's a number of ways, but if you do the right thing, there's probably 3 right things. If you do one of them, you're probably gonna be okay. If you have any other questions, I'll be here for a few minutes. You're welcome to ask me or whatever, but thank you very much for inviting me. I enjoyed it.